Today we will be reading Unit 3, Human Influence on Inheritance, Lesson 1, Exploration 1, pages 137 to 146. Africanized bees, sometimes called killer bees, are the result of breeding African honeybees with European honeybees to try to increase the honey production. Humans have been influencing the traits of certain plants and animals for a very long time. For example, by carefully selecting seeds from specific plants, farmers began cultivating many of the delicious fruits, vegetables, and grains that we eat today. The selective breeding of crops was just the beginning of ways that humans can influence inheritance. Today, we go even further by genetically modifying organisms to fit our needs and solve problems. In this unit, you will investigate how artificial selection and genetic engineering influence our lives. So here's that Africanized bee that they call the killer bee, which is a cross between an African honeybee and a European honeybee. Turn the page. We are skipping the questions on page 138. Unit starter. Analyzing the credibility of sources, and just kind of like we talked about at the beginning of the year, when you conduct research, it is important to determine whether information you find is from a reliable source or not. Some importance to questions just to think about for these resources of where was the research published, how is this information related to what you already know, who is behind the funding for this research. Analyze this internet search page to determine which of these pages are credible, and then it just wants you to look at the different sites. So, like I've been telling you guys before, not all websites are created equally. So anybody can get a .com domain. .org is pretty common too, but .gov and .edu sites are going to be your best because not everybody can have one. So just make sure that what this is just telling you is just make sure that when you're doing internet research, that your information is credible, that there's no question to whether or not it's something realistic. So like when we did the example at the beginning of the year with the tree octopus, there's no such thing as a tree octopus. So websites can look very professional and they can look like they have accurate information, but that's not always true. So you just need to make sure that you're being really careful with the information that you're using. Turn the page. Lesson 1, Artificial Selection. Gardeners grow roses for their bright colors, fragrance, and soft petals. They grow the flowers in special ways to influence how often these traits show up in flower crops. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain how artificial selection influences the inheritance of traits in organisms. So these are the roses. 141. How did humans cause alpacas to become different from vicuñas over time? Vicuñas are shy, fast animals. They feed on short, tough grasses in the Andes Mountains. Alpacas are their relatives. They are gentle and curious. Alpacas are raised by humans for their warm fur. So you can see the two types, the vicuña and then the alpaca. So they look very similar in body shape, but this one obviously has way longer hair. So question 1, compare the way the alpaca and the vicuña look. How are they alike or different? They share several things in common, like they have pear-shaped ears, narrow snouts, long necks. They both have woolly coats. However, the alpacas have longer coats and have a little bit of a stouter body. So the alpacas are in the picture are also whitish gray, while the vicuñas are more slender and have shorter hair and are more of a brown-white pattern. So you can see that difference. They're brown and white. These guys are whitish gray. Longer hair, shorter hair. These guys are a little thinner, so they're gonna be faster. These guys are a little bit chubbier, so they're mainly raised for their wool production. So question 2, do you think alpacas or vicuñas are more useful to humans? Well, right now it would be the alpaca because we get the hair from them to make clothing out of. That's where we get some of our wool from. So alpacas are more useful because they can provide more wool than the vicuña can. Plus, alpacas are a little slower, so they're easier to catch to shear the wool off of. So this guy is going to be more beneficial than this guy's shorter hair. Turn the page. Exploration 1, Analyzing Human Influence on the Inheritance of Traits. Humans have been influencing the traits of certain plants and animals for thousands of years. For example, people may breed horses to race or grow fruits that taste a certain way. People grow plants and keep animals for the products or services they provide. They separate these organisms from their wild population. This affects the possible traits in the separated population. Over time, domesticated populations may become very different from their wild relatives. People at the market may want to buy these tomatoes because of the colors and the shapes. Question 3. Discuss what traits make each tomato type unique. Why might farmers want to grow tomatoes with so many different traits? So you can see there's some red ones, some green ones, some orange ones, some yellow ones. Some are big, some are small. So the tomato in this photo, obviously they're different in color and size. Some have like a striping pattern on them. So they have different shapes. Some are more oblong, some are more circular. They're also going to have differences in traits that you can't see, such as like their flavor, their juiciness, and how resistant they are to pests. So farmers that want to sell their products to people can choose certain traits that will appeal to certain customers. So like you might get a customer that wants a certain flavor in their tomato, and you can alter that tomato to get that flavor. Or they might want a tomato that's really juicy, and so you might grow a tomato that would be more juicy compared to other tomatoes. Some people might want more of a unique tomato, so they might want it to be a strange color or have like striping on it. And then farmers can then demand more money for those special tomatoes. So that's why farmers might want to do it. So traits are passed from parent to offspring. The St. Bernard Pass lies high in the Alps, an European mountain system. During the 1700s, a single monastery near the pass kept a population of large dogs with thick fur. The dogs helped the monks avoid avalanches and find people trapped in the snow. The monks depended on the dogs for survival, so they bred only the most gentle and snow-wise dogs. Over time, these traits became common in the populations of dog. Even now, St. Bernard dogs will instinctively help people lying or trapped in the snow. The monks had little understanding of the biology behind inheritance, yet they knew that traits passed from parents to their young. They used this understanding to influence the dog's traits through selective breeding, or the breeding of specific organisms based on preferred traits. More than 100 years later, scientists began to understand the way inheritance works. So looking at this chart, scientific understanding of inheritance. Factors that influence the frequency of traits. So Charles Darwin was an English naturalist who studied the inheritance of traits in living things. He actually raised pigeons because he loved raising pigeons. So Darwin bred the birds to have certain features. He realized that nature, like humans, might influence the traits of living things. So Darwin applied this thinking to data he collected from living and fossil organisms. He observed that traits that provide a benefit in a certain environment become more common in populations over time. So natural selection. Second thing, inheritance follows patterns. Gregor Mendel was an Austrian monk who studied traits in pea plants. He carefully bred peas. He learned that some traits follow a simple pattern when passed from parents to offspring. Dominant traits appear in offspring when present. Recessive traits might be present but masked if there's a dominant trait. Mendel explained that there are 2 factors that can be inherited for each trait, one from each parent. These factors are now known as alleles. Modern genetics is based on Mendel's work. So basically the factors are you would get one factor or one allele from one parent and another factor or allele from the other parent, and combined they would determine what your hair color might look like, or in this case of the pea flowers, like what color the flowers were, or the shape of the pods, or the color of the peas. Inheritance patterns can be predicted. Reginald Punnett was a geneticist who built on Mendel's work, so he basically continued it. He studied more complex patterns of inheritance. Punnett developed a simple calculation table to predict the likelihood that offspring would inherit certain traits from parents. This table is called a Punnett square. Punnett used this table to show that certain feather colors in chickens are linked to being male. Question 4. By observing inheritance patterns, Darwin, Mendel, and Punnett developed the foundation for understanding how breeding influences traits in a population. They worked before or after scientists understood the relationship between traits and genetic material. Well, they worked before because they were the first. These gentlemen were one of the couple first people who were working with genetics. Society can use inheritance patterns to meet various needs because the patterns are unpredictable or predictable, and it's predictable. Inheritance patterns are usually pretty predictable. I mean, sometimes you get a mutation that happens or something odd that happens, or there's like something you don't know about, but for the most part, genes are pretty predictable, and inheritance is pretty predictable. So this is the picture for Darwin's pigeons, the pea plants that Mendel studied, and then a picture of a chicken because that's what Reginald Punnett was using. Turn the page. we are skipping pages 144 and 145 at most of 145 because it's a lab. So at the bottom of 145, artificial selection. The human control of reproduction in order to influence the traits present in offspring is called artificial selection. For example, dairy cows are bred for the amount of milk they produce, the milk fat level, and their pregnancy success. Artificial selection can encourage traits in a population that people want. It can also discourage traits that people do not want. Scientists can help describe the impact of artificial selection on populations. Society must then decide how to apply this knowledge. The traits present in a population are different when humans are the selective pressure instead of environmental factors. The traits people choose may not improve an organism's chance for survival or reproduction. This is one way artificial selection is very different from natural selection. Yet natural and artificial selection do follow the same rules. Both can only affect traits that are present in a population. Also, both selection types change the frequency of phenotypes, or the traits that you actually see, and genotypes, the gene combination that you would inherit in a population. Turn the page. So question 5, which of these factors make dairy cows a good choice for artificial selection? Select all that apply. A, cows vary in the amount of milk they make. B, the amount of milk cows make is affected by diet. C, the amount of milk cows make is an inherited trait. D, many people want to drink milk or cook with milk. So A would be correct because cows do vary in the amount of milk they do make. So that's why they make a good choice for artificial selection, because obviously farmers are going to want cows that make more milk naturally. B is not correct. The milk cows make is very little effect by diet, but diet can affect the milk production of a cow, but diet's not an inherited trait. That's something that farmers can control, is like how much they feed their cattle. So it's not something that would factor in or be a part of of being useful for artificial selection, because it's not an inherited trait. And like natural selection, artificial selection only deals with genes. C would be correct. The amount of milk cows make is an inherited trait. So they want cows that produce more milk, and some cows genetically are able to just have the ability to produce more milk than some other cows do based on their genetics. And then D, many people want to drink milk or cook with milk, and this would also be one that would factor into artificial selection, because you obviously want cows. If people want milk to use milk for stuff, then having cows that produce more milk would be better than cows that don't produce as much milk. So we're skipping question 6. Predict the outcome of artificial selection. Guppies are a popular fish for home aquariums. They have bright colors, broad tails, and spotted patterns. People who sell fish use selective breeding to emphasize certain traits in offspring. As a result, there are many types of guppies. For example, the half-black yellow guppy that has a half-black body and a broad yellow tail. Every part of the albino red guppy is a striking scarlet color, even its eyes. So the color, spot pattern, shape, and size of guppies in a population can be influenced through that artificial selection. So, just showing you a picture of the guppies there. And then question 7 wants you to draw. We're not actually going to draw, but it just says choose one of the traits in the guppy photo. Draw a guppy, what a guppy might look like if people selected that trait for over 10 generations, and then include a caption that explains the process. So basically, if we picked the albino guppy, like the one that's more red, so you might end up with an albino guppy and another albino guppy, and you might selectively breed them because you want them to the rest of the population to be albino. Well, it's not going to happen right away, because those albino guppies are going to also have other traits. So they might give birth to some guppies that are albino and some guppies that are not albino. Well, then you're going to keep going for the next few generations, and you're going to take out of your fish tank the ones that aren't albino, so that way over time your fish tank will be mostly albino fish, and you will have, like, each generation you'll take out less and less of the non-albino fish because you're breeding for that trait. Your homework assignment today is on Google Classroom. It's a SpongeBob worksheet dealing with artificial selection.